Hmm?
Oh, you're on. Your mic is on.
You're quiet. You're quiet. Let's see. Let's get me my watch.
Yes.
Oh. Okay. Are we about to begin on time? Are we about to begin on time? Because it's 50. Yeah.
Shortly now.
Okay. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our debate. The topic of the debate is very well known to you. It's, I would say, somehow also related to the extension of the mandate of AUDA of having community involvement in decision making and also involving people with lived experiences and patients/clients. And we're going to be debating, is it necessary? Well, is it necessary? Probably we don't debate because we all agree it's necessary. But we also might hopefully debate on the pros in some problematic areas and what kind of a time frame should be chosen. And this not national, it is globally, and we have a global discussion round. And I apologize that I make it very brief. Everybody here is very, very experienced. And I start with Elsa Burke. Elsa Burke is the person with the longest way to come to Lisbon. She comes from South Africa. And Elsa is very much involved. Basically, she has been shaping the addiction treatment in South Africa over the last decades. And she's involved with the Global Mental Health Peer Network and has a lot of consultancy, as many of the other colleagues here, with international organization. I keep on moving to Judy Chang. Judy Chang is the executive director of the International Network of People Who Use Drugs. You have been having this position already for quite many years. And Judy also is a person with a lived experience in drug use. And Judy has been working globally and beyond many, many things, your involvement is very much into decriminalization and alternatives. Finally, the third woman on the podium for debate is Joanne Neely, probably known for to many of you. She comes from the King's College from London, and Joanne is a professor of addiction qualitative research. Actually, I really like her publications on qualitative research, and I like the broad spectrum she's doing involving marginalized groups like homeless people and also looking into sex and gender differences. And this gentleman probably might not need to be introduced in Portugal. It's a highly decorated person here in Portugal, as I have learned looking into your CV when I did the preparation. But not only that, Luis has been on the front for decades, basically coming from the HIV/AIDS field, extending it over towards the infectious diseases and, of course, related to addiction, and as Elsa being a consultant to many, many organizations. And another very well-known person in regard to community research involvement is Tony Duffin. Tony Duffin is coming from Ireland. And Tony has a long history of being involved with drug addicts and integration of addicts, and starting very early on of being very supportive for housing for young addicts. And he is also the CEO of the Anna Liffey Drug Project in Ireland. And recently, Ireland actually made a wonderful task involving the community in developing a drug project. And that's, I want to start here. And Tony, please give us some information, how difficult, how successful. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Gabriele. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a good start. So what you're referring to, I think, is obviously the Citizens' Assembly on Drugs Use in Ireland. And it's an example of participatory democracy. It took place in April to October of 2023, and it was established, I think it's fair to say, citizens' assemblies really deal with really spiky issues for politicians, and the issue is passed to a group of citizens to debate and decide and recommend, not decide, but recommend to government how to proceed. And we had got to a point in Ireland where we needed to have a citizens' assembly because it was it's such a contentious issue when it comes to it. And the group met on 6 occasions. The community were very much involved. Community as in the communities that are affected by drugs use, the most affected, people who live in particular areas affected by drugs markets, people who use drugs, and so on. But when I say that, they were people that were perhaps brought in as experts by experience to come in and explain the situation, but the actual Citizens' Assembly was made up of 99 members and 1 chairperson, an independent chairperson, which was chosen by the government, Paul Reid, who did a great job. And I think it's important to mention that in Ireland, 1 in 4 people have used drugs in their lifetime, so about 23%. And that was a statistic from 2023. So the suggestion is that of those 99 people, about a quarter of people had experience of drug use in their lifetime. They were chosen. How were they chosen? 20,000 letters went out across the state, and people self-selected. And then when those people self-selected, then there was a criteria that they must meet, and that was applied, and that's how those people were brought together. A stratified random selection process is the correct terminology. I think it was a good example, of participatory democracy. We had, as I say, 6 meetings, international experts, national experts, people who, as I mentioned, are experts by their experience, but also people who are experts through education, as in researchers and academics. And also, I think it's fair to say, people like myself who are experts by exposure. I think 30 years of working in the front line with people. So I got to present twice on 2 different areas of my work. So that was a privilege. I think, how did it do? Do you want me to tell you how we did?
I just, for the beginning, maybe, how did the integration in the whole system work with the people who have experience with drugs? As there are quite some people there. Was this an acceptance by everybody, or did you have the feeling there was some resistance?
Yeah, I think in Ireland there is an acceptance of including people who use drugs and looking for both lived experience and living experience. So that was inherent from the beginning in the terms of reference. So that was good. Broader, there's always we'll talk about this in a moment, I suppose. But are we really good at it? That's another question. But in terms of the Citizens' Assembly on Drugs Use, absolutely from the outset.
And I'm sure that if you refer to the experience, lived or living experience with drugs, you're not referring to nicotine, right?
No, this would have been illicit drugs. Absolutely,
this would have been
illicit drugs. So, for example, at the end of this process, they would have voted on what to recommend. There was a particular issue around the regulation and control of cannabis, for example, and that ended quite close, quite narrow, about 2% involved, and they voted against recommending the regulation and control of cannabis. On that point, we've got a national drug strategy coming up, and I expect that will be discussed again at some point. But that's just an example of the kind of how it would have happened. We ended up with 36 recommendations from the very broad recommendations from the Citizens' Assembly, as I say, all including different experts that had fed into it. And if I would say that if those recommendations are implemented, we will have a very good national drug strategy going forwards.
Well, I think for me, it's a pretty unique experience Ireland's actually started. And I want to ask Elsa, coming from South Africa, having a different cultural population, a different drug population, a different societal situation, could you imagine that an equivalent project would be feasible in South Africa, or would it be too difficult? And explain to us maybe how the situation in the integration of clients and people using drugs or with lived experience is in South Africa.
So I think that we're quite desperate for studies to be happening in South Africa when it comes to harm reduction and substance abuse. The last study that was done in with research showing that 1 out of 5 men are abusing alcohol. However, when we look at our gender-based violence, those statistics show that there are definitely more people that are using alcohol and then abusing women and children. So that is the reality of what's happening, but we've got a severe lack of research when it comes to how many people are actually abusing substances. And one of the main bases that criteria for any form of recovery, when we look at recovery, is an abstinent-based model. There's very little eyes looking at harm reduction, so which is extremely sad. So also from a funding point of view, there's a lack of services when it comes to even an abstinent-based model. So people are not getting the help that they need, and we desperately need, lived experience to be going, peer workers to be going in, people to be being trained. We also have a severe lack of, when we look at employment, which means that we could be employing more people to be going in as peer service providers and actually providing a service from a lived experience point of view. So we're really, really desperate for research to be happening. And I was saying to Tony earlier that one of the big things is we are an extremely traumatized country, and I think that's happening globally for a lot of people at the moment. But from where I'm sitting, my people and the people that I see daily are severely traumatized. And substance is the cheapest way to go because counseling services are so expensive. So from a country point of view, we are set up, and it's been recognized that the WHO can be fully involved in the harm reduction program, yet there's a massive push against it because there's a want to keep the abstinence care in place. And I think that is from a financial point of view. And also from a lack of education around that there are other options. Because abstinence is unfortunately all that people really know about. So it would be really awesome if we could have more eyes on what's happening.
Well, I would think that the abstinence, or exclusively abstinence orientation, that's not only a unique issue in South Africa, this is kind of a global issue. And I understand that it's easier in the community involving former clients. It's getting more difficult involving patients, and actively using persons is kind of, at least in the European countries I am overlooking, seems to be quite difficult. I don't know, maybe Judy, you have from your global experience, you
yes,
can comment on this.
Yeah, I would say, EU countries, they have been a real leader in kind of peer involvement, since the 70s and 80s. And if we look at the, beginning of kind of harm reduction services in the Netherlands, was people with living experience, so actively using drugs that, push government ministers to fund harm reduction services led by people who use drugs. And I think, it's kind of disappointing over time. We are seeing, this defunding not only of harm reduction programs, but also of, peer involvement in the workforce. And, I would also say throughout time, even, before the cutting of services, peer workers were never remunerated, at the in the right way or, adequately or at equal level to, other workers within harm reduction services. So I do think that's something that we really need to look at. So I don't think it's moved to, wanting to, I think the reason why, there's less people with living experience being, employed is a lot to do, one with stigma, I think, as there's this permeation of, this culture of like abstinence is the best way. But also I think, there's a lot of structural and systemic issues within the way services are managed that, I guess fail to, adapt to the needs or really, engage, a peer workforce and know how to treat, people respectfully as well. So I think, those are definitely some of the issues that need to be addressed. But I think also beyond like using peers in delivery of services, I think there's a real, real need to engage, people who use drugs from the very beginning of the design. So if we're talking about systematic issues that, aren't retaining people who use drugs in employment, we need to, be engaging people from the very beginning in the design of the programs, right? And I think that only improves the quality of programs. At the end of the day, you can have the best kind of state-of-the-art, clinic program, in the world, but unless, people want to engage with them, unless clients are coming to the door, it's going to be a complete, waste of resources and a complete waste of time. And just to say as well, there are some programs, still that are completely peer-led. And I think they do, just an amazing job because, most of the time they're going beyond just giving out a needle and syringe, counting how many people they're giving it to. But, they do really well with wraparound services, recognizing that you have to take a whole-of-person approach, right? So there's a lot of accompaniment of people to, through the legal process, the court process. There's accompaniment to get documents so they can not only receive health services, but also social welfare services. So, there's much more flexibility and, respect of and understanding that, there are so many aspects to someone's life and, people need support at different, points.
Okay, so if we're going to be moving on from the community level to the individual patients level, I first kindly ask everybody from the panel, please interfere and comment whenever you want. Please don't wait until I'm asking, yeah? But from the patient level, maybe I keep on continuing with you, Luis, because you have many years of experience. Maybe what could you tell us, what is beneficial involving the target group in the individual decision-making processes?
Okay, just give me 2-3 minutes to make a little history. I'm Portuguese. When I was 20, I went to France to study biochemistry. I was a very science-oriented mind. I was very experimentalist, and I started to use cocaine and injected heroin and injected cocaine. It was difficult. I stopped before getting all my connections, familiar, friends, loves, etc., down, but it marked my life, and I get my infection with HCV from those times. Later, because of a certain unorthodox sex life, I also got infected with HIV. When I came back to Portugal, a circle of people were discussing, it was very early, 84, 85, the onset of HIV epidemic around the world that was burdening a lot of the population of people injecting drugs. There was a kind of shift in my mind regarding if the prohibition as it was conceived in the 60s, etc., at international level, was useful or non-useful for the problems generated by use of psychotropic substances. And I became an anti-prohibitionist that I still have. after all these years. So I didn't start from the harm reduction field. My start was from this. And the experience that I had and the situation in Portugal with the onset of the heroin crisis entering the poor neighborhoods in the big cities of Portugal, etc., was very important. And I believe that the participation of the people with lived experience has several layers. One is public policies. And I believe that we have a say on very fragile political decisions regarding drug use, production, and the system. So that's one set where I believe we should have a say, a structured say. Second thing, using drugs don't turn you intelligent, or not even able to perform certain tasks as everybody else. So I think that there should also be a process of lived experience at grassroots levels and of identification of those who can contribute from the public health perspectives, from the epidemiology, from other levels of knowledge, to be integrated in the process of decision discussion, decision making, and to validate proposals that are society.
But if we
yes.
just try to would be the benefit for clinical services? What would you think?
I will give you a story that has not been very far away. I was part of one thing that was called HCV Community Advisory Board, that was composed of expert patients with hepatitis C from the United States, Canada, and Europe. And for 4 years, we were meeting the pharmaceutical companies that were developing the new drugs. And I believe that without our contribution, both to FDA and the European Medicine Agency, in 2008, to reform the design of the clinical trials, we would have more 10 years than what it got to get the solution. But then it was also very important that most of the medical doctors were not following the research and development. And in Portugal, having a group of people that knew exactly what was happening on authorization of introduction in the market was critical to say that we don't want the first wave of DAAs, we don't want the second wave, we would want those interferon and ribavirin free. And we knew it was possible. But we also made a huge pressure towards the pharmaceutical companies because of the obscene price that they were trying to make. Portugal was the first country in the European Union to treat everyone, to finance the treatment for everyone, regardless of the damage of the liver, because we also contribute to the real go down of the price. It was confidential, but we know that it was 10 times lower. Just to finish.
Excuse me, but you gave now a very nice example on the patient's level, actually, because talking about dual active agent treatment for the treatment of hepatitis C, where the prejudice was that drug addicts are unreliable, that's too expensive, we should not give this expensive medication to eliminate HCV hepatitis C to these patients, and the patients' involvement learned how compliant the patients were. This was a fight, I think, in each continent until it was solved. But maybe let me ask Joanne, if you just separate drug use from the somatic infectious diseases, what is your opinion? What's beneficial for clinical services to integrate persons with experience and or even, let's say, methadone maintained patient? What you published a lot also in relation to sex and gender differences and marginalized group. Who could the services benefit?
Yeah, I think moving down a little bit to the individual client level, clearly, if you're not providing a service that people are interested in, it's going to be very difficult for them to use the service and stick to the service. I'd kind of like to just flag that there are, whilst I think we're all in agreement that this is a very good thing to be involved, there are barriers to involvement that it's probably important to recognise, particularly for people working in clinics, because if you're working in a clinical setting, you have the strictures of the rules, the regulations, the legal framework. You may have a treatment that you want to prescribe, but there isn't the resources. Then when you come down to the service level, you're dependent upon the staff. Have they got the education, the training? Do they know the different treatment options? And again, have they got resources? Then again, I think when you come down to the individual patient or client level, there are still issues we need to just be a little bit careful of, which is we all want people to have choice and we want people to have a range of options, but we want them to make informed decisions. So in order to make informed decisions, they need to have clear, accessible information so that they really understand what it is that they're choosing to have. But of course, I think we also need to remember that not all of us, all of the time, want to make decisions about our own treatment. So if I go to the dentist, I don't want the dentist to ask me what he thinks he's going to do. Like, I want the dentist to make the decision. So there is a time and a place for handing over the decision-making to the professionals, as long as they're inclusive and they tell you what's going on and inform you in that way. And it may be that you make that decision at one point in time in your treatment, but a little bit further along you decide you want to take a more active involvement in your treatment. So I think it's about services also being person-centered around the involvement that you give people. You shouldn't really be forcing them to take decisions if they don't feel that's right for them at that moment.
I think it's very critical what you're pointing out for yourself. If you're suffering on a specific disorder, it's probably not the best to try to be too much involved in the treatment. But in my experience, Tony, please, yeah.
Because it's clear that we're talking about patient care and involvement, and you said, that we're all in agreement that it's a good idea. And Lewis, you were mentioning around something similar. But I think at policy level, I don't think there's an agreement necessarily that it's a good idea. I've had discussions in this year alone where a colleague had said, why do we do this? Why don't we just follow the evidence, sort of thing? If there's another policy area, would we not just follow the evidence and just deliver the services and the responses? I suppose, what do people make of that notion that why do we bother at all? Mm-hmm.
But I think that comes back to one of the barriers a little bit further along the system, is that if people aren't educated themselves about the options and they don't understand that actually people are quite capable of making decisions in many circumstances, and it would be ethically and morally wrong not to give them some opportunity, then that's a point of intervention to make sure that services and providers and policymakers understand that as well.
And I don't mean to conflate the two, because I think they are different, but I think it is an interesting one, isn't it, that we are sitting here, and I think we do agree that it's a good idea, but I just want to say it's not always shared, and certainly in other jurisdictions, would I be right? Yeah, that in Ireland it is a good idea. We have really good structures, but there is a report by the European Harm Reduction Network that came out this year that for the first time took issues out from under the table from both sides, civil society and from the decision makers' side. And it's a great report, because it does actually put the issues on the table, and I encourage everyone to read it. but because then we can address those issues. Because I think there's a lot to be said about the under-the-table issues, and I am talking about policy, not about patient care. And you can tell me more about that. But I think that would be a good start if more jurisdictions got the under-the-table stuff. I'm not always comfortable getting the under-the-table stuff on the table. People will tell you, but it is helpful in terms of moving on.
Can I just
Please,
follow on
Judy.
from Joanne's point as well about the importance of client choice and informed choice. So we're also seeing a trend. I'm a client of opiate agonist treatment and have been for many years. But there's definitely a trend where people are being moved from Subutex, so buprenorphine only, to Suboxone and without choice. And this actually happened to me, 2 weeks ago. So walked into the clinic and then I was told, oh, you need to switch your treatment now because across all of Italy, everyone has to move on to Suboxone. You know, no prior notice, anything like that. I mean, I know that I can tolerate it. I've been on Suboxone before, but I think for many people, they can't. And I think sometimes service providers don't understand about the differences and how it can, impact individual. Like people will have different interactions to different drugs. But I've also heard this happening in other countries as well, in Canada, Greece, India, and yeah, I don't think, it's one of the under-the-table issues that I think, have to be discussed and brought about because I think it can have very negative impacts on people at an individual level.
I think that's, I take up this point now, what you bring with Suboxone. I think for the audience, it's known as a combined molecule from buprenorphine and naloxone in order to make it safer for the environment because there is a lower diversion problematic. And that's one aspect what we could discuss. Why? That's the diversity security level. But for the client, it's an additional drug what is in the body. So we are discussing this, especially looking at women in the reproductive age, while loading somebody with an additional molecule what might not be necessary. And there is a new formulation out in the United States, in Europe, I think in all European countries, in Australia, which is the depot product. And I realize, at least in the European Union, it's a huge discussion that this medication is so expensive. It's giving you, it's a shot which is taken once a month, what gives everybody a lot of freedom. You do not need to consider every day your medication. It's increasing the compliance, and it's destigmatizing because people do not need to line up in the pharmacies because they got the shot once a month. But a limitation in many countries is it's so expensive. And the insurance, the financial reimbursement system is very often much different. Portugal, I think, is a country where it's a social reimbursement, in my country as well, but still, it's a fight. The monthly costs are €350 plus minus, I would say, or even cheaper. Would somebody else with another disorder discuss this amount of money for a monthly medication? Just consider rheumatology or nephrology and so on. That's the medication cost for one day. So I think that's a significant discrimination where we really need the patient voices. But Luis, what's your opinion?
Regarding the question of buprenorphine, for instance, I remember when buprenorphine became generic and so very inexpensive. There was this move to combine buprenorphine with naloxone to get a patent again and higher the price. And there was also a very moralistic approach regarding the use of Suboxone over buprenorphine. It was to prevent additional uses of substances. In this moment, we are trying to fight both with the national regulators, but also with the producer of Buvidal, because we want to have access, because many of our people need once a month treatment, and with the things because we know that our National Health Service has limited capacity. So again, the patients are fighting to have access to the best option or the option that they would prefer, but at the same time in defending the national health system so we don't get bankrupted by these huge prices of the extended release of buprenorphine.
Just for completeness, I want to refer that it's not only Buvidal is Sublocade, so there's another product to have the complete information. And it's not an expensive product. It's for the insurance system. It's kind of they judge the value of patients. Thanks God, we have cancer treatment, which is expensive and extending the period of life. So this treatment is about it, not even the daily costs for other disorders. And still, it's required to get a patient's involvement and to have many, many stakeholders. But in general, what do you think? Involving patients in research?
Well, I wanted to add on to what you were saying about the medication, because I think for myself, also someone with lived experience, you often get told then that you're a difficult person that has lived experience, because how dare you have a say about medication? You should be grateful that you're being given options. And I think that that's something that we often ignore, because I think this conference, and it's been absolutely amazing regarding lived experience, but I think one of the big key things that we miss, and we had some conversations about it yesterday, was how does payment for people with lived experience and what does that look like? And one of the conversations that came up was, okay, people with lived experience shouldn't get paid, they should get vouchers. Because what are they going to do with the money? They're going to go and buy drugs. Well, are we not just then once again doing the re-stigmatization and saying, well, people that have lived experience with substance abuse they can't look after themselves. Do you know what I mean? They shouldn't be given money. So I think that that's also one of the under-the-table topics, and I know Tony's going to disagree or agree or say something here, because that's what he does. But I mean, that is one of the under-table discussions, and the thing when it comes to doing research as someone with lived experience, I believe strongly that we should be part of the co-authorization of papers. We should be part of the people that get paid for the work. We should be part of the people that have a say in what the research looks like, and start the research right from the beginning. Without that research, you guys are not going to have statistics. So, you know, go for it, Tony.
Yeah, you're wrong. No.
I'm wrong.
No.
Burn him.
No, look, I mean, certainly we've been involved in research in Limerick, particularly recently, where we paid people for their participation as around crack cocaine and the impacts, the social and health impacts of crack cocaine in Limerick, and another great piece of research that you should read. But yeah, people were paid, and they're paid in cash, and they signed for it, and that was absolutely right. But I mean, certainly in years gone by, ethic boards would say you can't do that. That seems to have moved on. Limerick University was involved and they didn't have an issue. We discussed it. And absolutely, people should be paid. There was some sort of suggestion that people will just do it for the money. They can tell you now.
And so what if they do? Sorry.
I'm not saying that.
Doctors go to work to make money.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're trying to paint me out now to be...
Not.
Absolutely. And people say, these people might spend it on drugs.
Yes.
They might pay it on rent. They might buy their baby something.
I'm sorry, so what if they spend it on drugs?
Yeah.
That's none of anyone's business.
Yeah.
That's private.
Okay. Yeah.
Just to add a little thing. I was invited recently to be in the ethics committee of the Institute of Drugs in Portugal.
That's great, because this I wonder when you were raising this. That's
Very
great.
good.
You see. And one of the things that I cannot convince my colleagues in the Commission is that we should pay the people using drugs to participate in the studies because they are providing input. So we use these
Vouchers.
ugly non-truths that we give them vouchers. I'm still buying food with the vouchers because I translate everything into money.
I don't-
So, look, it's something that we should also be aware. But it's very difficult to overcome this thing of paying someone. It was like people that use drugs were not eligible for when they were dying for opioids because they could get hooked on that.
Yeah. Look, we take one really good voucher, cash, and replace it with a less useful voucher to go to some other shop somewhere. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But can I, sorry, do you want to go?
No.
I
So I was
just,
going to change the topic.
Okay.
so I'll do the last thing on the topic. I don't have an issue with vouchers, but well, I do. My issue with the voucher system is we should be grateful for our scraps. We should be grateful for our scraps as peer researchers. And we have no say as to what our, why don't we just do a trade system then?
Yeah.
Literally, because that's what we go back to. My information and my lived experience is valuable, and I own that, and it's mine. And you have the right to have that if we do it properly. But it's like getting a PhD. I really struggled to get where I am today, and it's not okay to give me a voucher for that.
100% agree. No, I was just going to come back to your question, Gabriele, about long-acting depot-bupes. So I just think, obviously everyone's very excited about it, but I think it should be seen as one tool in the toolbox, and it should be about expanding choice, not taking away, like we don't want it to be enforced on people. But also just linked to your question about research and if people who use drugs should be involved in the research of that. Input, working with Medicines du Monde and Burnett Institute on a unit aid project on studying the feasibility and of long-acting depot-bupe across 10 lower middle-income countries. And there are components of the networks in each country being trained to do values and preferences research, which is then linked to the feasibility studies done by Burnett University. So I think that will give a really good indication of also demand for the product, when and if it's introduced.
So when
just
are
an
the data?
example of upcoming
When can we
work.
read about it?
Sorry?
When can we read about it? When we get the results from these studies?
Oh, well, it's a 4-year project, and it's just at the first year.
Okay.
So it's just starting, but I think it's a very exciting project. I think it's also about building the capacity of people who use drugs, in the research as well, doing values and preferences research, doing focus group discussions, doing qualitative research, and being remunerated, obviously, for their work.
Can I just come in first, a declaration that we do pay cash, although we also offer vouchers for those who want it. But can I also make a point of clarification here that I think we're conflating participation in research. We're conflating quite a lot of different things. So when I think about participating in research, I think about someone being interviewed or part of a focus group, they're a research subject. That is different from engagement in research. Engagement in research I see as, I come along, I tell you about my research, you listen, you're engaged. That's engagement. Involvement in research, which is what I'm interested in, is where people with living and lived experience help us with the research, doing the research. And that can happen at various levels. So at the basic level, I can say, here's my topic guide, and consult somebody, and they can say, yes, Joe, that looks fine, just change a few things. That's just consultation. That's not really proper involvement. What I tend to do is more collaborative research. So we work with people with lived experience, they're part of their team, they bring their expertise, and they're recognized for that. Now, I would argue, as I would, that's the best form of research, but I cannot do peer-led research because I am not a peer. And I think INPUT do, wonderful peer-led research. But it'd be interesting to hear Judy's thoughts on whether or not that is better than collaborating with the Burnett Institute, where you bring people with all different expertise together and create one united team, or whether it's better if people with lived experience take ownership of the research and do it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think it has to be one or the other, and there are definitely, I think pros and cons to each as well. So with peer-led research, having it be completely peer-directed, there's no negotiation, or less negotiation about like which direction should we take this research or how it should be done, etc. And, I guess there's more, of a tight-knit kind of sense about it because people are used to, working with each other in collaboration. I think, as with all partnerships and collaboration, the more people they are from different viewpoints, the more complicated it gets. It can either produce something really great, or it can be, messy. So we've heard, positive aspects of collaborative research and, negative aspects. And I know, networks that have done a lot of collaborative research projects, such as the Australian AVIL, so the Australian Drug User Union, this was probably like 10, 15 years ago now. They've done research guidelines on, how people who use drugs should be treated respectfully within research collaborations. But I think when it's done well, obviously people from all their different areas of expertise, and it's done respectfully, then yes, there can be amazing work, I think, produced for that. So I think there's room for both, and it's about how we make sure it's done well.
But I think regarding your question, we have several levels of engagement on research. We have peer-led research, that we need good researchers. Peer-led research needs to be good. If not, it doesn't serve anything. There are collaborative research where we are partners and we can input and everybody gets their part. Again, it needs to be good. And there is the traditional research that is academic-led, etc., where you need us to recruit and contribute to, as the cobayas, to be there. And at all these levels, we need good research, and there is very bad, in my opinion, research that leads to nowhere, that doesn't add anything to what we already know, etc. And there is a huge consumption of money and resources in science that is not fit. And I believe that our voices, with the very good researchers, in my organization we have 15 years of written collaboration and continuous collaboration with the Institute of Epidemiology and Public Health of Porto, where we always felt among equals, and I never produced so much peer-reviewed papers as I'm doing in the last 10 years. But this is really what I feel is that we community need to learn where the good institutions and the good research is taking place, because there we can make a difference, and they will appreciate the difference that we can make.
I come now to a very special group, to a very special target group. We all know that a considerable amount of substance-using patients is in prison. And the approach towards including prisoners, I would say, for the topic of substance, stay with the topic of substance use disorder, it's very different from the United States to Europe to Australia. The ethics boards make total different decisions, like in Europe, based on Helsinki criteria. You cannot do any treatment, any interventional studies in prison with this group. In the United States, actually you can do some treatment studies before the patients are released, because in prison they don't get the adequate treatment. In Australia, you even can do clinical trials. So it's kind of irritating, I would say, the ethics standards in the different continents. You have been working a lot with, from the early beginning, alternative to imprisonment. What is your idea? You think including prisoners with substance use into research is...
it's difficult to answer, really. In terms of services in prison for people who use drugs, you're dealing with a system that is knows that there are drugs in the prisons, but doesn't want to admit that there's drugs or be facilitating drugs in prisons. So people go to prison for as punishment, not for punishment. But in effect, the kind of services that are outside in the community don't exist to the level that they do, in prisons. Similar to, active military, which is very real in the world now, where people are traumatized, soldiers are traumatized, and veterans are traumatized, but nobody wants to really talk about drug use. In Ukraine, for example, on prisons, Free Zone has implemented recently implemented needle exchange in prisons, which is nearly always unheard of in jurisdictions. And sorry to come away from research, but that's the service provision is probably really where I'm better at talking at. But so for that example, and getting harm reduction to people on the front line in Ukraine, for example, is going to be hugely challenging. And of course, we know that people who are in war zones fighting use drugs. So it's this idea of it's not about people that are hard to reach, but the people that we find hard to reach, to get to them and help them and share information with them and such. So there's a few challenges there. Just while I'm speaking, I did go to On Point recently in New York and visited there, and if anybody is interested, I think you may be if you're here, their service user participation as well is excellent and worth looking at. Yeah.
So prison is, I think it needs a very strong ethical framework. The prisoners with substance use disorder should not be excluded, but it needs to be really under a very, very strong ethical network, not misusing the power in this special situation. And I just look at my watch, and we have about 10 minutes left, and I would like to come now to a policy level. If we have this situation, and you gave a very nice example, also the voucher example, we have different measures in the diagnosis of, I use not the word substance use disorder. It's a high stigma, basically in the whole psychiatric field. It makes it difficult and different to have role models in involvement of patients like breast cancer, diabetes. It moves, there are strong role models. I'm wondering, we all are facing the opioid epidemic in the United States. We all are aware of the fatalities of so-called celebrities. And for a short time, it bumps up. There needs to be support. But at the same time, there is a feeling that something dirty. It's very difficult, obviously, to find somebody who addresses publicly the continuous support of persons dealing with this problem. So policy-wise, what could be done that the situation for this group of patients is improving? There's more understanding. Do you have any idea how this can be addressed?
Well, I think that the public institutions like the European Union Drug Agency and WHO and all the others, and others leading that do have other areas, not drugs, need to identify if there is evidence that backs the importance of the different levels of the participation, and then make recommendations, and we should be part of the advisory board of these agencies to check if this happens. Because we would have better health if we would have more participation from the people affected by the health problems that we are talking about. And the second thing is that, again, as you probably were saying in the beginning, if I go to the Ethics Commission, but I need to go in my car, and I don't get a penny, and all the others are public servants that have their salary, and my organization needs to pay my day of study, and my day doesn't work. if there is not applications with a budget that covers the needs for the involvement of the people and the organizations, etc., in what it's needed, then we will not have it also. And in the end, what I feel, because again, first of all, I'm a citizen, and I'm not even nationalist, so I feel an European, I feel a man of the earth, I feel also Portuguese, of course. But I believe that civilization would recognize that working together on good governance, what is the other thing that we need to check what they do, accountability, etc., it's essential to really improve the way that we live together. And drug use or using psychoactive substances for pleasure, sorry to say, it's as old as humanity. So we need to learn how to live with drugs.
Thanks, Captain.
You actually threw one magic word, finances. And as we are coming to the end, Ireland, in this unique project, you had 36 recommendations. Yeah. Is there enough finance there to integrate this in kind of a considerable time frame?
Okay, so just so people know, a citizens' assembly in Ireland would cost about 700,000 euros, not including the salaries of the staff involved. So, but it's expensive in Ireland. The other thing to say about citizens' assemblies is they work better when they come from the government. There are examples of other forms of citizens' assemblies, but once it's inside the structures, and the example I can give of the one we're working through now is that on Tuesday last, a joint committee of our parliament made a further 59 recommendations on top of that, which goes to government before the general election in November. But all of this, now, is there enough money to implement all this? Well, the answer has to be no. Although Ireland does have, is very well funded drug services, but if you want to do all this extra things, we're going to have to, the government is going to have to come up with the money. And obviously, through all this participative democracy, you would think that the money will be there. You will hope, you know.
So any time frame? Is there? You've got 36 recommendations.
I think we could have another debate here about implementation science. I mean, the idea that we're very good collectively at talking about drug policy, but we're not so good at implementing it as consistently as we should be across the board. So in Ireland, there will be a new national drug strategy. There will be the usual processes that government goes through in terms of estimates and things as the years come. So it's really watch this space.
Okay, so I probably refer to the fact that at this conference this year, a lot of community involvement was, a lot of side events, people who with lived experience, with living experience. AUDA, the agency, is doing its job, so it's really rapidly integrating community and in the target population. And I probably want to close that we all are aware of that many human rights treaties, the UN human rights treaties we have, and the very basic one is the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And paragraph 4 tells us that in decision-making progresses, the patient's alliance or patients suffering on disorder needs to be integrated in the different levels from implementation to active, to accessibility to treatment. And I'm so happy seeing the move in these conferences. I do a lot with UN bodies. I hardly ever see present there this group what should be represented by their own treaties, and I hope this is going to be also changing in the near future. I thank the panelists. It's wonderful. Thank you very much. I thank the organization for inviting us.
Thank
And
you.
have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, everybody.